Hey guys, so today's video is a weird one. Yeah, you always say that. I don't always say that. I don't always say that. Okay, I say it a lot. But this one it's really out there. Yeah, we've heard that one before. Don't do this. Come back. I promise you won't regret watching this video. Thank you. Fine, we'll stay, but your wigs still suck. Hey guys, so welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, hello, my name is Gabby, and welcome to my strange little YouTube channel. Today we are back with another Vintage and Vanished, and today's video, the case is a little bit different because it's one of the oldest ones I've done on my channel. I think the only one that is older than this one is my Dorothy Arnold case, which happened in 1910. This one happened in 1947, so it's very old. Also, most Vintage and Vanished cases that I do on my channel, they mostly have to do with the disappearance of a person who was by themselves, like they were home alone or they went for a walk on their own. But this one is about the abduction of a little girl who was abducted in front of an entire group of people. It's a very odd case, and still to this day you can look online and there's new speculations and information being released all this time later. So with that being said, let's just get into it. On April 9th, 1947, Oklahoma had one of its deadliest tornadoes in its history. Still to this day, it killed roughly 185 people and left over 1,000 injured. The tornado swept through Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Woodward, Oklahoma was left devastated. Hundreds of homes and businesses were completely demolished. This 2.6 mile wide twister with winds up to 296 miles per hour just destroyed everything in its path, and people that lived through this were never the same. It left $5 million in damage, which in today's time would be about 57 million. Other than everything being just left in ruins, people had a lot of PTSD after this happened. People were on edge. They were terrified for the next line of storms and when they were going to come through. You have to consider that this was the 1940s. There was no weather channel. There was no Doppler radar. People were just taken by surprise by this storm. For one family in Woodward, the Croft family, after this tragedy ended, another one began. One of the people who tragically lost her life was Cleta May Gobble Croft. The side of their home fell on her and killed her instantly. The storm left nothing of their home, and her husband, Hutchinson Allen Croft, her 7-year-old daughter Geraldine, and her 4-year-old daughter named Joan Gay Croft were all trapped in the rubbish afterwards. A neighbor was able to help and get the girls out. They only had a few minor injuries, but their father, Allen, was badly injured and he had to be brought to a hospital in a nearby town. And the two girls were brought to the Woodward Hospital. This hospital was so overcrowded at this time, they were bringing body after body in of injured people and people who had passed away. It was a horrible scene, to say the least. Joan and Geraldine's cousin, Marvella, says that the entire lawn of the hospital was covered in bodies. You couldn't take one step without a person lying right in front of you. Both Joan and Geraldine were taken into the basement of the hospital where patients without life-threatening injuries were being housed, and both were put on cots. If you don't know what a cot is, it's just like a thin bed. They use them in situations like hospitals or in the army where there's just a lot of people that they have to house. Supposedly, Joan's main injury was a pencil-sized splinter in her leg. So she was definitely in a lot of pain at this time and needed to get checked out, but Geraldine's main injuries were just minor cuts and bruises. Like I say with most of my older cases, the older the case is, the harder it is to really piece together everything and find out exactly what happened. And the more time that goes by, the more time there is for rumors and gossip to occur. During that day, while they were waiting in the basement, Joan and Geraldine's Aunt Ruth, which was Allen's brother's wife, and their cousin Marvella showed up to the hospital where they learned that Cleta had passed away and Alan was in another hospital. After their Aunt Ruth visited with Joan and Geraldine, she went outside, she found her mother and her brother, and then she left to another hospital to go help out with the wounded. So during the night, two men in khaki shirts and khaki pants came into the basement of the Woodward Hospital and abducted Joan Gay Croft. Both of these girls were on cots, sleeping in a room full of other injured people and nurses, and two unidentified men came in and grabbed Joan and left with her. According to some witnesses and Geraldine, Joan was not putting up too much of a fight because she trusted the adults, and the adults saying that it was okay for her to go with these men. But she did say that she wanted to stay with her sister, and these men told her that they were going to come back later for her sister and that they were taking her to another hospital where some of her family was waiting for her. Hospital staff didn't really try to stop these men because they believed that with the men's attire, because they were wearing all khakis, they looked like rescue workers, that they were actually rescue workers, and they believed that they were of authority, and they believed what they were saying was true, that they were going to take Joan and that some of her family was waiting for her at another hospital and that they were going to come back for her sister. All the workers at the hospital believed this. Also, because the tornado just happened, there was so much chaos going on, and of course this was the 1940s, people were more trusting. So you do have to take that into consideration. Joan and Geraldine's Aunt Ruth showed up the next morning to check on them and heard that Joan had been taken in the middle of the night. The staff told Ruth that the men claimed that they were taking Joan to a hospital in Oklahoma City, which was about 140 miles away. There is no reason that she would have been taken to this hospital in Oklahoma City. None of her family was at this hospital in Oklahoma City. They called the hospital, and the hospital told them that they had absolutely no record of Joan at all. Her family never found out what happened to her, and still to this day, they have no idea. The morning after Joan went missing, Geraldine was transported to the Crippled Children's Hospital around 11 a.m. Joan's family reported Joan missing, and they began a very extensive search. Even the FBI was brought in, but they never found any trace of her. No belongings, no supposed sightings of her, no remains, nothing. Their father, Alan, was interviewed in June of 1947 for the Daily Oklahoman, and he said, "I was still unconscious under the rubble of our house when the children were taken to the Woodward Hospital. Later, I was taken to the same hospital, but I was removed about daylight to the Baker Hospital. Then I was taken to the home of some friends. It was 2 days before I was able to start looking for her personally, but my wife's people began trying to find her as soon as the storm was over. They missed her because they didn't know anyone had been taken to the hospital basement. The next day, she was gone." Last person to see Joan Gay, he said, was Miss Clyde Taylor, a neighbor who saw her in the hospital basement the night of the tornado. Two other persons remembered seeing her at the hospital. They were a nurse who said she gave her a drink of water, and Mary Carter, another neighbor who carried the injured girl to the hospital. Also, during this interview with the newspaper, Alan told them that he had a good friend, a doctor who worked at the hospital that Joan was supposedly taken to, and this doctor told him that every single person that checks into the hospital they have a record of, and they had absolutely no record of Joan ever being at this hospital. This is a case where every single person that was a witness had a different story, and some of these stories made absolutely no sense at all. There were some witnesses who were nurses that claimed that the two men came in and they actually prevented the two men from taking Joan. But if that's true, who took her? Where did she go? There were two witnesses that claimed that these two unidentified men were actually rescue workers, and they helped load Joan into their ambulance on a stretcher. But if these two men were actually rescue workers, they had to have taken her somewhere, and there's no record of her anywhere. Now, most of you guys at this point are probably thinking that these two men that abducted Joan were just two random men who came into the hospital basement and with the chaos of the tornado figured that this would be a perfect time to abduct a little girl. But the thing that's weird is that according to the nurse who spoke to them, when they came in, they specifically asked for the Croft children. These two men somehow, some way, found out that Joan and Geraldine, the Croft children, were at this hospital in the basement without any family with them, because if there was family with them, they would have prevented them from taking them. So how they got this information is unknown. As time went on, they recovered 3 bodies after the storm, all girls. One was about 12 years old, one was about 4, and one was about 8 months old. They brought in Joan's Aunt Ruth to examine the middle child's body and see if it was Joan. She did, and it didn't turn out to be Joan Croft. The 3 girls were buried in Elm Grove Cemetery in Woodward. Even though extremely hard to look at, they took the mortuary photos of the eldest girl to schools in the area and asked the teachers and staff if they recognized her, and none did. Still to this day, it is unknown the identities of these 3 young girls. Nobody has really came forward and said that they were their missing children. It is unknown if they were related to each other. They are still buried in Elm Grove, and we haven't done any DNA tests on them to try to figure out who they were. In the summer of 1947, all the way in Weed, California, a housewife was walking through a field and found a little girl who had been badly beaten and completely abandoned there. She was brought to the hospital, and because of the shock, she was unable to talk, but the people at the hospital named her Baby X. This little girl was roughly the same age as Joan. She had a lot of similar features to Joan, so many people thought that this little girl, Baby X, was Joan Croft, that she was abducted, she was abused, and she was dropped off hundreds of miles away from home. But after further research, they realized that it wasn't Joan Croft. I do have to mention that Joan had a little bit of a speech impediment, so a lot of people thought that maybe she was taken to a hospital, and because of her speech impediment and the fact that she had a little bit of a lisp, that they were unable to write down the correct name because they possibly heard her wrong. There is a little bit of a hole in this theory, because even if they at first wrote her name down incorrectly, I feel like they would have eventually figured it out, because they would have had to track down this little girl's family, so I just personally don't believe this theory. Joan's father was completely heartbroken. Of course, he just lost his wife, he just lost his daughter, so him and Geraldine ended up moving not long after the storms and this incident occurred, and he got married in summer of 1947, so within a short period of time, and he went on to have 2 other children. This is a little bit weird that he moved away not long after, but there really isn't much speculation that he had anything to do with Joan's disappearance. Why would he randomly decide to get rid of Joan after his wife died and still have his other daughter? So I don't personally think that he had anything to do with it. I think he was just devastated and wanted to move out of the area because there was no evidence being found of where his daughter went. Through the years though, tons and tons of women came forward thinking that they were Joan Croft. So many people, probably to this day around 400 to 500 people, but one of the most known was a woman named Jean Smith. Jean said, "I never felt like I belonged to the people who raised me. I knew I was just different from them. I didn't look like any of them, my children don't resemble any of them, and I couldn't remember anything about myself from before the time I was about 6 years old." Smith said she had a Boise, Idaho birth certificate that gave her date of birth as December 15th, 1941, and she was identified by that birth certificate for 47 years. Joan Gay Croft was born October 28, 1942, and throughout her school years, several teachers suspected Jean was younger than the other students in their classes, and that she suffered from problems her parents refused to discuss. Jean Smith suffered from photogenic amnesia, which meant that she couldn't really remember much of her life before a certain point, but she had flashes of memories that she couldn't really piece together. Jean came across the Unsolved Mysteries episode about the case and was convinced that she was this missing girl from Woodward, Oklahoma. She reached out to Alan's sister Nellie, and after a brief conversation, even Nellie, which was Joan's aunt, believed that Jean Smith was Joan. Jean Smith met with Marvella, which was Joan's cousin, and the first thing that Marvella asked her was to see her leg, because of course, after the tornado, Joan had that injury where she had a pencil-sized splinter in her leg, so she looked at her leg and she in fact had a scar. Everybody was convinced that Jean Smith was actually Joan Croft, but within time they did a DNA test and she wasn't Joan. There was also a woman in Canada who even Marvella at one point thought could have been Joan also. This woman from Canada said that when she was younger, she used to have photographs with the names Allen and Cleta written on the back, and also some charcoal drawings signed by O. Croft. She can't find these anymore, but strangely, Allen Croft did like to draw, and this wasn't something that a lot of people knew about him. For a short period of time, people thought that this woman could also be Joan, but again, it hit a dead end, and she wasn't Joan Croft. This case has so many theories, and this is one that I came across that kind of caught my eye. On Message Snopes, a user named Princess Perfume on December 29th, 2013 said, "In the time period that Joan disappeared in, brokers for childless couples and illegal adoption agencies kidnapped children to supply their high-paying clients with a child to their liking and description. There is a very good chance Joan was picked up by brokers who were hunting to get a child to their clients' liking." I think that this is a really good theory, and it's not brought up a lot in this case, but back in the day, and of course in today's time, there's a lot of fishy things that go on behind the scenes. And it is likely that brokers were working with a client who wanted a little girl, roughly 3 to 4 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, and these men sought out Joan Croft and figured that with the chaos of the tornado, this would be a perfect opportunity to abduct her. That is just one theory. Tell me what you think about it, but there's also another theory that I came across that seems possible as well. Joan's father, Allen, grew up on the Croft farm in Kansas, where his uncle, Uncle Guy, and grandfather, S.M. Croft, were very well known at fairgrounds for taking home top prizes on Galloway cattle and draft horses. So Allen was a very wealthy man, actually the most wealthy man in town at the time. Some think possibly these two men abducted Joan, knowing her father was in another hospital, and were going to eventually ask for a ransom because he had so much money. Then something possibly went wrong. Maybe Joan had an infection because of her injury, and she maybe could have passed away, and then they weren't able to ask for a ransom and then dispose of her body somewhere. Whether that's the case or not, in my opinion, I really think this theory does make a lot of sense, because it's just too coincidental that the richest man in town, his daughter was the one who was abducted. I just think that the motive was most likely money. Possibly these two men found out that Allen was in this hospital, discovered that his wife passed away, and that his two daughters were at the Woodward Hospital in the basement by themselves. I don't know how they could have found this out, but it is a possibility. If you thought the twists and turns were done in this case, you're very wrong, because this is another one that is huge in this case, but we don't know if it was actually true or false. An editor for the Woodward County Journal named Robert Lee would write anniversary stories about the case every year, and then he joined the Oklahoman staff, and on April 12, 1999, he received a very strange email. "Mr. Lee, I know that you have written many articles about the 1947 Woodward tornado and about the missing Joan Gay Croft. How would you like to write an article about what really happened to Joan Gay and where she has been for the past 54 years? She has been and is living in Oklahoma City off and on since 1956 under a different name, with the full knowledge of her father, Orlin Croft. She even graduated from an Oklahoma City high school under her different name. If you want more information, please contact Joan Gay at email address Miss Joan Gay Croft." After receiving this email, he checked with the Oklahoman to see if they could track down who the person was who sent this email, but this was back in 1999 and they were unable to do that, so he replied to the email and got a response back on May 2nd. "Mr. Lee, I know this time of year there are many people who crawl out of the woodwork claiming to be the lost girl, but I was never physically lost. My immediate families never knew I was. I just didn't know who I was. Until just lately, I never faced the fact that Cleta Croft, my mother, died upon me. I buried this information deep within my long-term memory and refused to accept. If you want to know the rest, email me at email address. We will arrange to meet in person to discuss the details. I propose we meet at Penn Square for the first meeting. I would like to meet in public, but not publicly and without photos. Please let me know a time and date convenient for you. I am on the internet most on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 9 and 10:30 a.m. As to compensation, I would prefer none. Yours, Joan Gay Croft. He responded telling her that he would love to know more, and he said that his wife was also injured in the tornadoes, thinking that this would kind of make her more comfortable with him and talking to him because he can relate to what she went through. But she never responded. They never found out who this person was, and that was the end of that. You're all probably thinking the same thing, and that is that in the original email, this Joan called her father Orlin and not Olin. And she spelled gay, G-A-Y-E, and G-A-Y. The actual Joan Gay Croft spelled it G-A-Y. This person who claimed to be her spelled it G-A-Y-E. This is really weird that she spelled the names differently, but as I was looking on Reddit, a lot of people said, and I'm talking like probably 50 to 100 people, said that this isn't that weird, that their family used to switch up the spelling of their names all the time, especially back in the day and in southern states. So it is a little weird, but it is something that used to be very common. A lot of women would spell their names differently and add an E to the end, like in the name Faye, F-A-Y, and then add an E because the E makes the name more feminine. So this is something that was done. I also have to mention that there's also strangely a Twitter with one tweet from March 22nd, 2011 that reads, "Posted my case, years in the making, hope family understands." The person who owns this Twitter page is named, the person who owns this Twitter page is named Joan Gay Croft. It's just weird, I had to mention it. It's just a vague and odd post, but there could be something more to it. So I think that's where I'm going to end this video. I have been to the end of the internet. I have looked at every single article and comment that anybody had about it. I have looked up everything, and this is the information that I found, and I am presenting it to you all, and I want to know what you guys think down below in the comments. I don't really have a set 100% opinion about this case, but I do lean more towards the motive being money. I think that these two men had this planned out, and this tornado swept through, and they saw it as a perfect opportunity in the chaos to abduct Joan. It is weird that they didn't abduct both little girls, but maybe they just had their eye on Joan. A lot of Joan's family has passed away, but they still hold hope in finding out what happened to her. I mean, there's a possibility that she was taken into another family and lived her entire life out as a different person. I mean, she was abducted at 4 years old. I can't even really remember much before I was 4 years old, so this is a possibility. Her remaining family do have a lot of faith still to this day that they will find out something, and I hope that they can find their answers. I will see you guys in my next video. I love you guys so much. If you're not already, make sure to subscribe, also like and comment down below. I love you guys so much.